Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. I've got a great show lined up for you tonight. We're celebrating my 49th birthday, and so we're going to talk about 49 ways gluten can damage your health. So stay with me. We're going to be talking about some of the more common things, some of the more esoteric things. If you're new to the gluten-free world and you're not sure, stick with me through all 49. You might just find that some of these are symptoms that you're experiencing. So without further ado, let's dive into the 49 things you don't know about gluten, or that you may not know about gluten. So starting with number one, key here, everyone with celiac disease is gluten sensitive. And I saw already a question in the feed about this, but not everyone with gluten sensitivity will develop celiac disease. Very important that you understand that. Probably one of the most important of the 49 things. In essence, everyone with celiac disease is sensitive to gluten, but not everybody with gluten sensitivity will go on to develop celiac disease. There are a lot of other conditions that gluten can cause, celiac being one of them. It's so very important to understand that. There was a question in the feed about vitiligo and being tested, and you were tested incorrectly for gluten sensitivity. You were tested for celiac disease, and you didn't have it, but it doesn't mean you're not gluten sensitive. And so let's just put, let's see, I believe that was that question. I can't remember if it was an abbreviation, is AA, whoever AA is. Let's put a link up for AA on how to properly get tested for gluten sensitivity, and that's through genetics. It's the proper way to do it. You don't want to do it any other way. Number two, eating processed gluten-free food products contributes to malnutrition and diabetes. So a lot of people, when they go gluten-free, they run straight to the gluten-free food aisle and they start eating all the garbage, all the junk food, and then they wonder why they don't get better. They wonder why they're still not feeling well. You can't restore health eating garbage food. So processed gluten-free foods, first of all, most of them aren't gluten-free. Second of all, they're not good for you. They continue to contribute to poor health and illness. Number three, there is a form of gluten in corn that can cause inflammatory damage. And the name of that gluten is Zane. So a lot of people aren't aware of this. Corn products can be labeled gluten-free by law. And so again, when you go buy gluten-free breads, pastas, cereals, etc. that have corn in them, you're actually being exposed to Zane, which a study in 2012 showed Zane was more damaging than wheat gluten. And so you want to be aware of that. Number four, 92% of those following a gluten-free diet continue to have health problems for several reasons, but cross-contamination of processed food, consumption of corn, rice, sorghum, and other grains. So remember, 92% going on a gluten-free diet continue to have persistent gastrointestinal inflammation. Those are research studies that followed patients up to 18 months, and another study up to 5 years of being gluten-free. Again, the diet's not working because people are doing it wrong. Number five, villus atrophy, which is a sign of celiac disease, right? So when doctors are doing tests to determine whether you have gluten or whether gluten sensitivity or whether you have celiac disease, villus atrophy through a scope is one of the tests that they run. But did you know that villus atrophy can also be caused by corn, soy, dairy, viral infections, as well as parasite infections? And so just because you have villus atrophy on a scope is also not an accurate indicator that you have celiac disease, because there are other things outside of gluten that cause villus atrophy. Number six, processed food can be cross-contaminated. Matter of fact, one study showed 41% of products pulled off the shelf that were inherently gluten-free were actually cross-contaminated with enough gluten to cause inflammation and damage. Which brings me to this. How much does it take to cause inflammation and damage? 20 parts per million. That's one breadcrumb. Not a very big amount, right? So 41% of foods labeled gluten-free in the grocery store had at least a breadcrumb or more of gluten in it that was capable of creating gluten-induced damage. So there's your first 7. Let's move on. Number 8, gluten-free on the label doesn't make it healthy. Now, I've iterated this already once. Processed packaged gluten-free foods don't necessarily help you restore health. But what we see here, when people put gluten-free on the label, what are they really doing? This is marketing speak. They're marketing to you because in the public eye, there's this connotation that gluten-free is somehow healthier or better for people. So we'll see the term gluten-free on things like candy and things like ice cream, you know, stuff that's not generally good for you, stuff that's loaded with sugar, stuff that's loaded with genetically modified types of food ingredients or pesticides. Look, just because it says gluten-free doesn't make it good for you. So be observant and be discerning of your food labels. Okay, number 9, over 200 medical conditions, okay, can be caused, contributed to, or worsened by the consumption of gluten. And this has been very well studied and very well researched. That's why gluten is oftentimes referred to as a medical hydra, because if you're gluten sensitive, it can cause a lot of different kinds of problems. Number 10, gluten is a common cause of unexplained iron deficiency anemia. So those of you out here today watching, if you've ever been diagnosed with iron deficiency and you don't know why, and your doctor just said, hey, take iron, or maybe they didn't even say take iron. It happens a lot with the people that come to see me. Or you've had multiple infusions, meaning your iron is so low you've had to go in and get blood infusions because your iron keeps dropping. Gluten is one of the top causes of unexplainable iron deficiency. So if you've had that happen to you, you need to get properly tested or vetted for gluten sensitivity. And that's, again, how do we do that? Genetics, not through scopes and not through blood tests that can be misleading. Okay. Number 11, gluten can cause vitamin B12 deficiency. So this is iron deficiency. Here's vitamin B12 deficiency, which can also cause anemia, but some of the symptoms of this as well, symptom of B12 deficiency is the next one on the list. Vitamin B12 deficiency can cause migraine headaches. And so we know gluten can also cause migraine headaches, but gluten can cause migraine headaches in more than one way. Gluten can cause autoimmune migraine headaches, but it can also lead to migraine headaches as a result of causing vitamin B12 deficiency. The next one, casein, a protein in dairy, can actually mimic gluten. So many of you who are following a gluten-free diet but continue to struggle, there's a whole nother section that people refer to as the casein-free, gluten-free diet, CFGF diet, and that's because so many people eating gluten are reacting to casein because of the mimicry here. I always generally, when I find somebody that's gluten sensitive in my practice, we do 6 months minimum, 6 months off of dairy to, if there is cross-reactivity happening or molecular mimicry happening, we can calm that immune system down enough to maybe potentially introduce dairy later down the road. And sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. Okay, number 14, excessive gluten consumption can cause both weight gain, but it can also cause weight loss. So most people with celiac disease struggle with the weight loss piece, but this is something we're seeing more and more common in most. So most people with gluten issue don't actually struggle with weight gain. They struggle with weight loss. They struggle with actually putting too much weight on. They actually are overweight at the time of diagnosis. And there was a study recently published a number of months ago, and I think, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was more than 60% of people with initial diagnosis of gluten sensitivity were actually obese or overweight and not underweight. So again, a misconception there. All right, number 15, lab tests for celiac disease are not specific and have a tendency to give false negatives. So again, one of the questions that came up early on that we just answered, which is I was tested for gluten, and it came back negative, could I still be positive? Yeah, because these tests can give you false negatives. It's a very common thing to see. Okay, number 16, children with learning disorders often respond well to a gluten-free diet. So what is this? This is Asperger's. This is ADD, ADHD. Very, very common to see kids with these conditions respond very well and do better and actually make great strides in improvement by diet change alone. Okay. Number 17, the best way to lab test for gluten sensitivity is with DNA testing. I've hit on this already. DNA testing, HLA-DQ is where it's at, folks. HLA-DQ, alpha-1 and beta-1 tests. Those are what we want to know about a person when we're trying to rule out whether or not gluten sensitivity is an issue. Number 18, gluten sensitivity is completely different from wheat allergy. You'll see the terms sometimes interchangeable. You'll see people say, I'm wheat allergic. You'll hear other people use the term, so allergic, you'll hear the term sensitive. You'll hear the term intolerance. Technically, these terms are not interchangeable. They all have difficulty to think they have a wheat allergy and no other problem. It's just common, and so you want to understand these differences. And by the way, if you're not enrolled in our master class on glutenology, it's called the master class, the Glutenology Master Class. That's coming up in September 15th through the 19th. It's free. Let's throw that link up in the feed for you. So if you haven't yet registered and you need to know more about gluten and you want to get the details, the granular details, make sure you register for that free master class. Okay, some medications can mimic gluten sensitivity. And so this is really quite true of blood pressure meds. So if you're on a blood pressure medicine, particularly a kind of blood pressure medicine called an ARB, an angiotensin receptor blocker, these drugs have actually been shown in over 17 studies now to cause villus atrophy and gluten mimicking damage. So again, if you're on blood pressure medicine called an ARB, check with your doc. Okay, you can take an quick and easy quiz to determine whether going gluten-free is a good idea for you. If you want to jump in on this, if you haven't yet, if you're not sure whether a gluten-free diet is right for you, take our quiz. We'll put that link up for you as well. It's also free. You can take that quiz, and depending on how you answer those questions, might give you a good indicator as to whether or not you need to look more into genetic testing or look more into getting specific about your diet. Okay, number 21, it can take 3 years to fully recover from gluten-induced disease. This is a mistake I commonly see people make, is they go gluten-free for a month, or a few weeks, or even a few months, right? And then they're expecting that all those years of damage just magically disappear, right? And that's an unrealistic expectation. In my experience, I've been doing this 21 years. My experience, it takes 3 years for most people to come around to full recovery, because you're not just getting the gluten out of the diet, but you need time for your body to become renourished, to get the vitamins, the minerals it needs to heal, repair all the years of damage, but also to recover and recoup the inflammation and make new tissue. And that can take time. And where this really takes the longest is if you suffer from neurological. So if you have a gluten-induced neurological problem, which is very common, probably one of the most common is peripheral neuropathy. So those of you, this is another one, for those of you who aren't aware of it, neuropathy can be caused by gluten. And there are different forms of neuropathy, but neurological symptoms take the longest to heal and repair. So let's move on to 22. Okay, so gluten can cause autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease, and there are, to date, depending on who you ask, there are about 100 plus forms of autoimmune disease, including anything from autoimmune liver hepatitis to autoimmune thyroid disease to autoimmune skin disorders to autoimmune GI tract disorders, and gluten is a known culprit in many of those. So autoimmune disease, if you've been diagnosed with it and you haven't been told about gluten, you're missing the boat, folks. So make sure you, again, get this part figured out. Number 23, seizures, epilepsy. A very common manifestation of gluten exposure is seizure disorder or epilepsy. We've written extensively on this. There's a lot of research supporting this. As a matter of fact, the Discovery Channel actually had an episode a number of years ago on a child that whose mom was a celiac, and the child wasn't celiac, but the child developed epilepsy, and it was as a result of gluten exposure. So the child just manifested epilepsy instead of celiac disease. Different way to look at it. Number 24, gluten can cause leaky gut. And that's because gluten can disrupt the proteins in the GI tract that anchor the cells together and lead to microscopic pinholes in the gut, leading to, again, your poop leaking into your bloodstream. That's no good. Okay. Number 25, nerve pain and neuropathy. Gluten can cause neuropathy. I just mentioned that a minute ago, but again, chronic nerve pain. So if you struggle with burning of your feet, burning of your hands, paresthesias, numbness and tingling, what doctors oftentimes, I've seen this be misdiagnosed a lot, where somebody's been told they had carpal tunnel syndrome, and they did a surgery to open that tunnel up. And it didn't fix the problem. It's because their problem wasn't their carpal tunnel. The problem was they had a neuropathy. So very common manifestation of gluten exposure. Gluten can cause dizziness and loss of balance. And this is actually a form of neurological. Remember I said a minute ago that the neurological manifestations of gluten can take the longest to heal. And this is one of them. There's a condition called cerebellar ataxia that's been being researched very aggressively in the UK as a result of gluten exposure. Okay, next, thyroid disease. And this is both Graves'. I've seen it in both. So Graves' is a hyper, right? So it's an increase in thyroid function, but it's also Hashimoto's. So both of these are forms of autoimmune disease. And Hashimoto's is a low thyroid function. Two common questions we get. And then there's also nutritional, so gluten causes malnutrition, and there's nutritional thyroid disease, typically hypo. When your nutrition levels are low, your thyroid won't function and perform properly, and that can lead to, again, nutritional hypothyroid as well. So you could have any one of these different forms, and you want to think gluten as a potential trigger. Okay, asthma symptoms. Asthma symptoms, very, very common. One of the oldest known forms of gluten issues is called baker's asthma. And that's because when the bakers were throwing up the flour, they would breathe it in, and it would irritate and inflame their airways. So asthma is a very common manifestation of gluten sensitivity. Okay, so let's move on to 29. So I got to keep my eye on the number here. So gluten can cause 6 types of skin disease. And so that's everything from, we've seen it be a trigger in vitiligo and eczema. We've seen it be a trigger in psoriasis and a trigger in rosacea. So very, very common. We actually did an entire show on gluten and skin diseases. You can check that out. Go visit Gluten Free Society and punch that in the search engine. Gluten can be a trigger in autoimmune arthritis. So joint pain, if you've got lupus, if you've got RA, rheumatoid arthritis, if you've got something called reactive arthritis, if you've got psoriatic arthritis, if you've got spondyloarthritis, these are all forms of autoimmune arthritis that we know gluten can play a major role in triggering. We know that gluten can cause gallbladder malfunction, and there are a number of people in the U.S. today that go and have their gallbladders removed, and all they really had to do was change their diet. But once the gallbladder's out, it's out. You can't get it back. So if you're kind of on the fence here, if you've been told you have gallbladder malfunction, if you've been told you're struggling in that area, you might want to consider looking at gluten as a potential possibility. 32, it can cause IBS, and that IBS stands for irritable bowel syndrome. And so it's gluten, but it's also grain, and this is an important delineation here, because some researchers are now finding that FODMAPs, if you haven't heard of FODMAPs before, these are types of sugars predominantly found in grain, but can also be found in other foods that can cause irritation to the bowel because they're very challenging and difficult to digest. So gluten and grains both can cause the IBS. We know that gluten can contribute to testosterone problems in men. So men, if you're feeling like your get up and go went up and left, you feel like you're having a hard time putting on muscle mass even though you're working out adequately, if you have sexual drive problems, like these are potential issues that men will face when they are being exposed to gluten if they're gluten sensitive. We know gluten can cause liver damage, and it can cause it in a number of different ways. It's similar to the thyroid. We know that there's an autoimmune hepatitis that gluten can cause, okay? We also know that the malnutrition that gluten can cause, some of the deficiencies, like perfect example of a nutrient deficiency that can cause fatty liver is choline deficiency. Choline's like a B vitamin, and so choline deficiency can cause your liver to start basically storehousing fat. So very important to understand that. We also know that gluten can cause GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, or acid reflux. Problem here is a lot of people, instead of like trying to figure out why they have acid reflux, they'll go to the doctor, get a prescription to block their stomach acid, and then that sets the stage for the next 10, 15, 20 years of their life where they're really struggling because they're masking the gluten-induced symptom while creating malnutrition, because acid reflux medicines cause digestive problems that lead to iron deficiency, B12 deficiency, zinc deficiency, selenium deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, etc. So not a healthy thing to do. Okay, let's see here. Moving on to 36. So keep my count up so I can give you 49 tonight. The gluten-free diet is not dangerous to follow if you don't have a gluten sensitivity or gluten issue. So that's a myth, right? So you'll hear a lot of times, don't go gluten-free unless you're celiac because it's dangerous. And that's a myth. It's not a myth at all. There's no danger in going gluten-free. There's no risk for malnutrition. Where the danger is if you do go gluten-free is if you go gluten-free by eating a bunch of garbage junk food that's labeled gluten-free. If you're eating whole foods, if you're eating real foods that are grain gluten-free, you don't have any risk or any worry whatsoever. Most doctors are in the dark about gluten because the learning focus in medical school is nutrition deprived. 7 hours or less is the average amount of time a doctor will get training in nutrition. And remember, gluten is a nutritional issue. And so it's very, very important that we're educated on nutrition to be able to be an expert in that arena. And so that's why doctors are in the dark. They just don't have the same level of knowledge about nutrition. Okay, next, vitamin C can help heal inflammatory damage caused by gluten. There have been studies that show that some people won't really respond well to their diet until they start getting adequate vitamin C. Vitamin C is very important for the healing process. It helps to restore and heal collagen. It helps collagen fibers link together to form new tissue. And without that vitamin C, it can be very, very challenging to heal. We know that gluten gets blamed for health problems caused by exposure to pesticides. And this is one of the big issues that I see is that some people are reacting to glyphosate. They don't actually have a gluten sensitivity, but they are being poisoned by the pesticide. There's another type of pesticide commonly found in grains, is atrazine. So we know that pesticides can also cause poor health, and some of the symptoms can have overlap with gluten sensitivity. And so it's important. Some people are gluten sensitive and they're reacting to the gluten. They're also being poisoned by the glyphosate. And that's why when they go to places and they travel where glyphosate is banned, so like if you go over to Europe and some of the countries there, you don't feel quite as bad eating those food products that do have gluten in them because you're not getting the other poisons along with that. Doesn't mean you're not gluten sensitive. Again, and this is where I would encourage anyone who's not sure about whether it's glyphosate or whether it's gluten to get proper testing. Okay, next, gluten gets blamed for health problems caused by other proteins found in grain. If you've heard of lectins, lectins are a class of proteins commonly found in grains that can cause health issues, especially things like IBS and joint pain. There's another example I can give you here, ATIs. ATI stands for amylase trypsin inhibitor. This is a group of proteins that can be found. They're non-gluten proteins found in wheat that can cause leaky gut and can cause activation of something called a toll-like receptor, which causes gut inflammation. So this is another reason why sometimes people go and get tested for gluten. They feel bad when they eat grain. They're tested for gluten. The test comes back negative because the problem isn't the gluten per se. The problem might be the lectins or the ATI. And this is where if you have a good doctor who can rule these other things out as well, that's a smart thing to do. We know that gluten can be found in braces and orthodontic materials. So there had actually been a couple of case studies written up on children with braces reacting because they had celiac and they got a gluten-based adhesive in their orthodontic materials and it was making them sick. We know that gluten in cosmetics and skin products can cause health issues as well, even though you oftentimes might hear that gluten can't be absorbed through the skin. This is actually one of those myths because a lot of people, remember too, you can have leaky gut, you can also have leaky skin, and so rubbing lotion all over leaky skin, it goes right in and now you have a systemic problem. So It doesn't have to, it doesn't, again, it's not always about what you eat. Sometimes it's about what you apply to your body directly. Okay, let's keep going here. There are hundreds of different gluten proteins found in grains. So this was discovered in 2012. A group of researchers out of Australia discovered it was about 400 new forms of gluten. 40 of them were more toxic than wheat, than the traditional gliadin found in wheat, barley, and rye. So it's oftentimes people don't realize that it's not just, gluten is not a plural, or it's not a singular term. It really shouldn't be gluten, it should be glutens. It should be a plural term. We know that quinoa is a bad gluten substitute because it contains gluten-mimicking proteins. There were a couple of studies published a few years ago that found that people with gluten sensitivity reacted to some of the proteins found in quinoa as well. It was the same type of reaction. There's no such thing as a gluten-free oat. By definition, the type of gluten in oats is named avenin. And so avenin is gluten. It's a type of gluten, and many people react to it, and that's why there's no such thing as a gluten-free oat. And if this is the first time you're hearing about it, I apologize. Somebody that gave you your original diagnosis should have been more informative, but now you're here, so now you can learn. Rice is a bad substitute for gluten-free diets, and one of the reasons why is it oftentimes contains toxic heavy metals. And so when you're trying to heal and repair, the cadmium, the arsenic, the potential for lead is very high in rice. It's actually even higher in brown rice. So a lot of people eat brown rice thinking it's healthier, but actually not so much, because that's where a lot of those heavy metals live. Rice also contains a form of gluten called orzonin that you don't want to get exposure to. Gluten can cause joint pain. This is why I wrote No Grain, No Pain. It was because of the prevalence of pain caused as a result of gluten exposure. So gluten is definitely a cause of joint pain. Gluten can also cause eye disease. We did a show on this not very long ago, and I talked in depth about gluten causing retinopathy, so damaging or inflammation to the retina itself that can affect vision. We also know that gluten can cause cancer. I'm actually going to be talking at a conference here in the next couple months on this very topic, how gluten actually contributes to multiple different forms of cancer. Did we get through 49? Was that 49? I lost count there. Well, that's the end of my slideshow, so I think we got through 49. So I could probably keep going, but let's answer some of your questions and see what we got here. Okay. I don't know if I have mold poisoning. I could have come from my thermos or humidifier. Mold poisoning is, so if you mean mold toxicity, so there's two ways you can react to mold. There's being mold allergic. So there's mold allergy, which is not the same thing as mold poisoning. Mold allergy, although you can be allergic to molds the way you could be allergic to ragweed, the way you could be allergic to food, but mold poisoning generally refers to mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are different than mold. Mycotoxins are mold poop. Basically, they're highly toxic, volatile organic compounds that can poison you. They're poisonous to humans and animals both. And so the way you would know whether or not you have a problem with mold poisoning or mycotoxin poisoning is to test. There are a number of different ways to test for mycotoxins. And that's something that you would want to do, is check and get with your doctor and check for mycotoxin levels. And if your levels are elevated, now you can dive into where that mold might be coming from. But generally speaking, unless you're eating severe like rotten food or very heavy mold contaminated food, your mycotoxin levels won't be elevated enough. Generally, where we'll see people with mold poisoning is going to come from environmental mold growing behind the walls or growing, in their home. Let's see here. Why does the food industry only think that gluten equals wheat only? Even dietitians seem to think this, because they're undereducated. Again, you go back to, it's no offense or affront to anyone who has a dietetic degree, but the training is traditional. In dietetics, you get traditionally trained. And so what does that mean, traditional training? Traditional training is a focus on what are known as macros. So there's a hyper focus on carbs, fats, and proteins. And this is a very simplistic way to look at nutrition. And this is, again, that's traditional training. So they're not going, not to say that they don't study vitamins and minerals and some other things, but it's just not a super in-depth form of training. And so as it relates to gluten, how many people, if you asked 100 doctors, what is gluten? How many of them would give you a correct answer? Most of them would give you an incorrect answer because they don't know. Ask the same question of dietitians, and most of them, if they're trained well enough, will tell you this. They'll give you this because this is an acronym that is taught in school, BROW. What does that stand for? Barley, rye, oats, and wheat. So this is an acronym that's taught, and many dietitians will learn this in their schooling. So if you ask them what gluten is, they'll say it's a protein found in the brow grains. Again, that's just a way that helps them remember it. But not all of them remember this. Remember, you have good students and you have bad students. And just because somebody goes on to graduate doesn't make them the equal of somebody else who went on to graduate who is much more aggressive in their learning style and tactics. I mean, not all professionals are equal, right? I'm sure you've all had an experience where you hired a bad plumber, or you hired a bad electrician, and then maybe you had to hire a good one to fix the bad one's work. Well, that isn't any different in healthcare. You can hire a bad one too, and so that just is what it is. Let's see, what is the gluten in wheat called? The gluten in wheat is called gliadin, Gliadin. That's the main gluten found in wheat. Is it true that malnutrition in childhood can lead to hypertension in adulthood? I heard that from a PhD nurse. So it's generally not the malnutrition in childhood that leads to the problem in adulthood per se. What happens in childhood, so what you did as a kid doesn't have to follow you as an adult, like as a doomsday statement. But generally what we set up as children is we set up habits, right? We set up habits as a child, and those habits roll into adulthood, right? If you've ever heard the biological argument, nature versus nurture, these habits are something we were taught. They're the nurture we were given. And if they're good habits, when we're adults, we'll be healthy. And if they're bad habits, when we're adults, the damage from choices, so let's just do a math equation here. Bad choice multiplied over by time, okay, equals disease. In this case, we're just talking about high blood pressure. If you change your choices, even as an adult, so you could be an adult and you could have been nurtured improperly as a child, and you could have high blood pressure here in adulthood, but you can change your choices, right? So if we say good choices over time equals health, right? So you can change that even in adulthood. And the reason I clarify is I don't want anybody walking away from my show thinking that there's some kind of just because what you did as a child, you're doomed with that forever. You can make those changes and you can improve your health. Are there really mold and mycotoxins in wheat products? Is that why bread gets moldy after a few weeks? Well, no, I mean, yes, there are molds and mycotoxins in grains, wheat included. That's not necessarily why they get moldy after a few weeks. They get moldy after a few weeks is because there's ambient mold in the environment. And so if that stuff is left out, it will start to mold, because what does mold eat? Mold eats carbohydrate foods. It really loves grain. It's very easy for mold to set up shop and use the grain to eat as a fuel substrate so that it can replicate and grow stronger. Let's see here. Can gluten affect the liver? I think I mentioned that earlier. Okay, so the question specifically, does gluten affect the liver and testosterone levels in women? Yes, it can affect, doesn't have to just affect men, it can also affect women. Can gluten cause peripheral neuropathy but no other major symptoms? Chris asks. Yes, Chris, it sure can. There's actually some doctors that believe gluten sensitivity is a neurological disorder primarily, meaning that gluten can solely manifest in the nervous system, creating neuropathy and no other symptoms. Can I use goat milk if my body reacts with normal cow's milk? Apparently, I'm not reacting to anything with goat milk using now almost 3 months. You can, but you know that some people are allergic to goat milk. Some people are sensitive to it. So I mean, whether or not you are or not, that's something you can get tested for. Goat milk has a different type. Remember earlier I said that milk has a protein that mimics gluten. So we got, the name of that protein is casein, but specifically there's a type of casein from most cows in industrial countries. It's called A1 casein. And so what's unique about goat milk is the casein in goat milk is A2, which A2 doesn't tend to, so this one can mimic gluten, A2 does not. And so that's where a lot of people can tolerate the goat or the sheep. Now you can, you know, if you want to buy your own cows, you can actually buy A2 cows. They do exist. I have 5 of them. And so that is where some people can tolerate dairy okay. It's just the type of dairy that's commercially produced has that specialized casein that can create a problem. So goat and sheep milk that is a potential workaround. But again, many people that do that still react, and they still have problems with dairy, not because of casein at all, but because of some of the other proteins that are found in milk, like lactalbumin is a different type of protein found in milk that some people are allergic to as well. So you can be allergic to the non-casein portion of dairy and do poorly with milk, so it just depends on the individual. Is black rice any good? Black rice, you know, depends. If you're talking about black rice, if it's actual rice, now I've seen it mislabeled. So black rice, also sometimes called forbidden rice, is still rice. Now there are some rices that are actually they're a form of really the term is wild rice. So wild rice is gluten-free. And sometimes it's mislabeled as black rice. So if you're referring to wild rice, we're okay. Wild rice is technically not a rice at all. It's a marsh grass. It's a marsh grass. So it's different than your other rices. So wild rice is gluten-free, although many people are still allergic to it. It is gluten-free. Can gluten cause you to sweat at night? I'm way past menopause and have really bad tinnitus. Yes, it can. It can cause you to sweat at night, very much so. Other things can too, but gluten definitely can, Michelle. Okay, what are the mold tests? Again, I mentioned mycotoxin testing, so that's you ask your doctor to, you know, there's several mold tests, but mycotoxin testing is an important part of determining whether or not you have a mold issue. I have celiac disease and I'm constantly bloated. Is there anything I can take to help with that? Yes. So one of the problems with celiac disease is when you're trying to recover from years of gluten-induced damage to the GI tract, your digestion doesn't work as well, so the act of eating in and of itself is more challenging because your pancreas isn't secreting enzymes or you've got damage to the GI tract. So digestive enzymes, one of my favorites is Gluten Shield. And this has a spectrum of digestive enzymes that help break down gluten, but also help you digest your food. I have another formulation called Ultra Digest, and this is another formulation that has additional enzymes in it for, again, to support digestion. So these two things both might be of help if you're still bloating and you're gluten-free, but I would also suggest make sure you're truly gluten-free and that you're not still getting some of these other grains or grain substitutes that can behave like gluten. Something else that you might consider if your digestion is if you're bloating a lot as well, is you might consider an acid supplement. Some people do well with betaine hydrochloride. We have a product called Ultra Acid. With betaine hydrochloride and gentian root and some other things that help support the breakdown of food in the GI tract. So those are all things that you can do. And then one other thing you can do is a good, strong probiotic. Sometimes years of gluten-induced damage alters the microbiome. And when that happens, you can be left wanting with healthy bacteria. And so sometimes it can be a good jump start to support your gut flora. Taking a probiotic. One of the ones I recommend is Biotic Defense. It's a strong, it's got about 42.5 billion colony-forming units of Bifidolactobacillus species in one capsule. So it's a pretty strong dose for one small pill. Let's see here. What causes inflammation and autoimmune disease markers to be missed in blood tests? Lack of diligence on behalf of the doctor. I don't know what else you mean by that, unless you're talking about false negatives. There are a number of tests that, are not perfect. And so many tests that are trying to pick these things up might not pick up. So example, antibody tests. If you're running antibody tests for autoimmune disease, you have to pre-qualify running them. And the reason why, antibody tests typically measure IgG, IgM, and IgA. And so if you're using these tests to try to determine whether you're having an autoimmune reaction, you have to first pre-qualify whether these tests are valid by understanding whether your IgG, IgM, or IgA levels are normal. So run those at the same time. If you run these ask your doctor, run my total levels of IgG, IgM, and IgA, and if the levels are normal, then you validate any kind of antibody test that you're measuring for autoimmune disease. However, let's say you come back and your IgG levels are low, and now you're using an antibody test that measures IgG response. It can give you a false negative on that kind of test, because if your overall IgG is low, then your specific forms of IgG to different types of bodily tissues might also be low. So again, that's something doctors don't often do. They don't do their diligence on that front side, where they pre-qualify the test by knowing what your antibody levels are. Nicola, so what can I eat? Nicola, here's what I want you to do. Go to glutenfreesociety.org. At the top in the menu, there's a section that says recipes. And I want you to there's over 150 recipes there. Just go there, click that link, and you're going to get all kinds of ideas about what you can eat. That's where you want to start. Well, okay, what about chronic granulomatous disease? Yes, chronic granulomatous disease, there has been linkage to gluten in research studies, and I've actually seen cases clinically where people have improved. Can you throw light on alopecia universalis since it's an autoimmune problem? Can it be cured fully? Any protocol, since there isn't much info out there? I love that question, Raza. So to answer your question depends on what stage you're in. With alopecia to that grade of degree where you've lost all of your body hair, if it's relatively new loss, meaning if it's just recently occurred, oftentimes I've seen it be reversible. I've seen cases where women were bald and grew their hair back. So it is possible, but if you let it go on for years and years and years, is it possible to reverse years and years and years worth of damage? I've seen it go both ways. I've seen some people be able to regain some of their hair growth, and I've seen some people not be able to. It just depends on how advanced stage the autoimmune, how destroyed those hair follicles have become, because you can destroy them beyond the point of recovery if you take it too far, if you take it too long. Cassandra's asking, what would you suggest supplements to support abnormal liver enzymes, high ALT in the liver? Well, probably my favorite formulation is one I actually put together. It's called Ultra Liver Detox. So that's one you could attempt, Ultra Liver Detox. It's gluten-free, and it's got a number of ingredients in it, but silymarin and milk thistle is one of the major active ingredients, as is N-acetylcysteine. Both are very critical for supporting liver health and recovery. Those of you asking me about specific names of specific lab tests, I just want to let you know this isn't me ignoring your question, but if I don't agree or like a particular lab, I generally, the old saying, if you can't say anything good at all, or if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything good at all. That's just kind of where I'm going to leave that with that question. Why would you fast for 7 days? Why would you fast for 7 days? I think the benefit of fasting for many people is their bodies are so overwhelmed by environmental stimuli and chemical stimuli coming through food. And so fasting can give your body an overall break. And there are times where fasting can be appropriate for 7 days. My experience is this, though. Most people that fast receive a tremendous benefit because they quit eating, and they quit eating what they were allergic to, so they stop the damage from coming into the body. And then when they start eating again and they break the fast, they pick up where they left off, and they're just going right back to damaging their bodies. So it's kind of the number one rule. I call it the number one rule of detox, because the fast is a form of detox, but the number one rule of any detox is this right here: don't retox. And this is where I would never use a fasting strategy if I didn't know what I was allergic to, what I was sensitive to. If I didn't know what chemical exposures I was having that were creating problems, then I'm not a big fan of detoxification if you don't know what caused the toxicant overload or overburden in the first place. Now, there's common sense things that you can do, like obviously eat organic food, don't expose yourself to pesticides, try to avoid chemical cleaners and other things that we know are just not healthy and not good for you. But some people are allergic to their favorite foods. I've seen cases of blueberry allergy that were terminal. I've seen cases where broccoli was the problem and where cauliflower was the problem. So again, these are things that are oftentimes part of a detox, right? Some of these juice detoxes where people are juicing a lot of kale or spinach. I've seen that be the case. So the number one rule with detox is don't retox. But the number one rule of not retoxing is knowing what's creating the toxic burden in the first place. And that's where just my mind goes to being objective, and right. And that's through objective measurements. So through testing. Let's see here. Vitamin C seems to be the, I don't know, Holden vitamin, maybe that's a typo, maybe that's golden vitamin for helping everything. I'm just assuming, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Shauna. Confused with liposomal or different forms better, and what dose for teens and female adult. So I'm glad you asked the question about liposomal C, because liposomals are corn derivative. And this is one of the reasons I don't use them. Liposomal have corn, and that's why I don't like them. Now, some of you that don't have a problem with corn, maybe a different issue, but I just won't use them because our platform is no grain, no pain, and corn is a grain. If you're looking for a good vitamin C, plain old good ascorbate, detox C, which is ascorbic acid. And please don't argue, none of you, don't leave comments about ascorbic acid or ascorbate not being the complete vitamin C that's found in plants. Ascorbate is the Nobel Prize winning nutrient that has been shown to heal and repair. And so I'm not saying there aren't benefits to eating whole food based vitamin C, but if you're trying to get high doses of something in, you're not going to do that through food. You're going to do that through ascorbic acid. And this is where clinically this can be very, very powerful. So if you're taking ascorbic acid, you want to make sure it's buffered. And this is why in Detox C, you'll see there are minerals that buffer it. We have magnesium and calcium and zinc and potassium that buffer the vitamin C. That's to prevent the acid from basically creating too much acidity and creating an irritation or a problem. So we buffer it for that very reason. Now, as far as quantities, if you're talking about quantities, anywhere from 2 to 5 grams a day, if you're really aiming for higher levels to support yourself, for example, for cold and flu season, that's very, very safe. The great thing about vitamin C is your bowel will let you know when you're taking too much. You can take vitamin C to bowel tolerance, and what will happen is you'll get loose bowels. That means you're hitting a point where the dose is too high, so you got to back it down. So let me give you an example. Let's say you took 5 grams today and you had loose bowels all day. Back that down to 4 grams. If the next day you still have loose bowels, back it down to 3. And at that day, if you don't have loose bowels anymore, 3 is a good amount for you to be taking. Again, if you're trying to take in as high of a level as is safe for your bowels to tolerate, to basically give you support. Can gluten cause bladder and kidney stones? Not really. Gluten can affect kidney function. And so let's think about this directly and indirectly. So the kidneys filter your blood, right? And so where gluten can induce something called nephropathy, and one of the types of nephropathy, which is kidney disease, right? IgA nephropathy. I've seen this be reversed 100% on a gluten-free diet in a number of people. And so in that regard, gluten can dismantle or reduce kidney function. Now, what causes kidney stones typically is vitamin D deficiency. So low levels of vitamin D combined with oxalate, too much oxalate in the diet, combined with dehydration. Like kidney stones, it's not just one thing, right? It's kind of usually it's a conglomeration of different things. Now, sometimes oxalates can be high because people have a yeast overgrowth. So if you have a yeast overgrowth, gluten can sometimes trigger yeast overgrowth. That can lead to increase in oxalates. If you're also vitamin D deficient and you also don't get adequate fluid and you also have gluten-induced nephropathy, then yeah, gluten can cause, through all that roundabout way, can cause an increased risk for the development of stones. That's if we're talking about oxalate stones. There are different types of kidney stones, though. There's struvite stones, there's oxalate stones, so it's not always... I hope that explains it well to you, because there are nuances there we don't really have time to get into all the depths of, but yes, it can indirectly. Let's see here. Should I repopulate the gut microbiome after extended water and electrolyte fast? Was looking at Biotic Defense. You know, it depends. I mean, you can. A fast doesn't necessarily depopulate the gut microbiome. So I mean that if you're under the assumption that fasting somehow depletes the gut microbiome, there's a lot of research that actually shows that fasting improves the balance of the gut microbiome. So if you wanted to come back and take a probiotic, you can, but you may not need to. Can gluten cause Meniere's disease? Yes, it can. That is one of the neurological manifestations of gluten. Can gluten cause damage to the eye nerves and cause intraocular blood pressure and dry eye and loss of vision? I have seen it. I have seen gluten damage the nerves to the eye, the cranial nerve that feeds the eye. Absolutely, I've seen that be the case. Now, as far as dry eye is concerned, there's a lot of, I want to be just real cautious to say, yes, it can, but so can other things. I guess that's maybe where I want to go with that. I don't want you all to get the impression that gluten causes everything and nothing else can cause anything. I want you to get the impression that if you struggle with an unknown diagnosis of unknown cause or unknown origin that your doctor's trying to medicate and nobody's ever asked whether or not gluten is playing a role and that condition is an autoimmune condition, you need to ask the question about gluten. Should we be more concerned about gluten contamination or glyphosate or both? Both. I think both. It's super important, especially if you know you're gluten sensitive. How best to help with asthma problems? Depends. Asthma has multiple different causes, but gluten can be one. So one great way to help asthma problems if you're gluten sensitive is to not eat gluten. What are my thoughts on colostrum for healing the gut? Do you have a product with colostrum? I do. I like colostrum. But some people are really super sensitive. And even though technically colostrum is derived from dairy, but even though the purified versions of colostrum don't have detectable dairy allergenic proteins, some people that are ultra sensitive to dairy don't do as well with colostrum. So I have a product that is non-dairy called Immune Shield. And then I also have a product that is dairy-based colostrum called Ultra Immune IgG. And so let me just make sure you can read that right. So Ultra Immune IgG and Immune Shield. This is a bovine serum product. So it's blood-based, whereas this is dairy-based. So both of these are good options, but depending on whether or not you're allergic to dairy, one might be a better option for you. Let's see, what's the minimum carb should I take with hypothyroidism? So that's kind of a loaded question, Vic, because it's how tall are you? How much do you weigh? What are your goals for your weight? Like that's just it's a loaded question because there's not enough details there for me to give you an accurate answer. There's not a minimum quantity of carbohydrates. I would just say if we're generalizing as a whole, look for equality in your diet. most people are wrong. They go too far abreast, and so we look for what I call the rule of thirds. So no matter what you're eating, no matter how many calories you eat, strive for equality between carbs, fats, and protein. Unless you've been put specifically on a ketogenic diet where your fat goes much higher, your protein goes higher, but your carbohydrates gets down to anywhere 10% or less of your total caloric intake. But there are very few people that absolutely need to be on a ketogenic diet. Some of them are on them therapeutically for diseases like epilepsy or other neurological disorders or diabetes management. So just depends. But start with equality in your diet as opposed to starting with radical shifts. Food intolerance results in gas buildup, always requires considerable burping. Do you know of any other solutions to relieve this quicker? Yeah, if you're struggling when you eat, if you get gas buildup every time, take a digestive enzyme and take possibly even an acid support supplement to help with your digestion, and that might help you navigate those intolerances. Remember, intolerance is not the same thing as allergy. More so, intolerance is when you don't digest something very well. So taking supplements that support digestion oftentimes are very helpful. Maxine's asking about reliable testing to determine food allergies. Maxine, there's a lot of them. There are a lot of different ones. There's not one test because there's 6 different ways the immune system can react to food when you're trying to determine food allergy and food sensitivity. So it's multiple different types of tests. We're working on a solution for I say that, generally in my practice, people come to me from all over the world and they want to get tested, and that's what we do. And we're working on a solution for people who maybe want to do it through online, but we don't have that ready yet. And when that's ready, we'll make a big announcement and we'll explain all about it and what it means and what it looks like. But right now, we just aren't there. Heart palpitations after eating gluten? Yes, that can happen. That's a common thing with gluten. I can't tell you how many times I've seen heart palpitations just completely go away with the proper diet. Mark is asking about organic corn tortillas. Yeah, you can eat them, but if you're gluten sensitive, they're not gluten-free no matter what the label reads. The label can read gluten-free all at once, but even organic corn contains zein, which is definitely a gluten-based protein. So Gina, I have SIBO with constipation, training very hard to find a way of getting my bowel working. On suggestions, please. To get your bowel working again, yeah, if you're reading my book, No Grain, No Pain, and applying the 30-day protocol, that's the best place to start. Beyond that, you got to make sure that you're sleeping well, that you're exercising and moving your lower torso, because sometimes people have gut problems for lack of movement and lack of mobility. It's very important to move the body so that it functions, especially so that your GI tract functions properly. If broccoli gives me lots of gas, does it mean it's bad for me? It means that you're not digesting it well. So one of the ways that you can, broccoli is a cruciferous vegetable, and like all cruciferous, they are gaseous forming. And one of the ways you can reduce that is you can cook them very well. A lot of people try to eat them raw, and that can be a mistake for some. So cook that broccoli till it's soft, like steam it until it's soft. It still retains its nutritional value, but it'll be a lot easier on your GI tract to digest and a lot less gaseous forming. Let's go down on the left side. Cheryl says, my eye doctor diagnosed me with epithelial basement membrane dystrophy and epiretinal membrane of the left eye. Could that be caused by gluten? I don't know. I haven't seen that particular condition or read anything about that particular type of eye illness. Could it be associated with gluten? Possibly. I would say I don't know about the autoimmune response, but I would say that the gluten-induced malnutrition could definitely affect the way that your eye is capable of regenerating. And so that is a potential possibility, but whether or not it's exactly gluten, it looks like you're already on a gluten-free diet and you still have the condition, so probably isn't going to be directly gluten-related. Can you recommend how to increase white blood cells and neutrophils? Mine are below 0.5. Gosh, Shauna, so with that's a monster of a question. White blood cells are made in your bone marrow. So I would just say if you're looking for something simple to support blood cell production, so just, all right, here's my long bone. Inside your long bone, you've got marrow, and inside the marrow, you have what are called stem cells, okay? And these stem cells are precursors to your red blood cells, to your white blood cells, but also to your platelets. And if you're trying to stimulate bone marrow to grow, one of the things that can cause neutropenia, and which is low neutrophil count and low white blood cells, is folate, which is vitamin B9, and vitamin B12. When these two are low, oftentimes this can drop. And so again, it doesn't mean that that's what's happening with you. There are other reasons, but this is a real simple nutritional experiment you can do. Now, I would suggest that you follow up with your doctor and a hematologist and rule out any of the other major diseases that might impact or affect your bone marrow in a negative way that could be, quite dangerous illnesses. But nutritionally, this is one great way to help support stem cell production of your blood elements. And so that would be something that you can start there. I see that quite a bit in people that come to me where their B12 and folate are quite low, and they've got this long history of low blood counts. And we see them come up with that. Sometimes too, what can improve white blood cell counts, so since we're talking about it, is supplementally is L-glutamine. L-glutamine is the primary fuel source. So it's the fuel source for your white blood cells. And so not having adequate L-glutamine can contribute to low counts as well. Gosh, the questions haven't stopped and we're running out of time. I think we already did. What's the best way to heal the damage from celiac? The best way, Jennifer, in my experience, is no grain, no pain. So if you've not read it, get a copy from the library or pick up a copy at Barnes & Noble or Amazon and apply it. That's the quickest way to really start recovering from celiac-based damage because it goes deeper than just a gluten-free diet, which, if you talk to your GI doc, you know that generally they don't go to any great depth at all. And a lot of times the information they give you is harmful to yourself and you don't even realize it because, again, you didn't know this information. So no grain, no pain is a great place to start. Let's go down on both sides. We'll knock a few more of these questions out. Melissa's asking about lung disease and mycotoxins. Yes, you can develop lung illness as a result of mold exposure, no doubt about it. There's actually a dangerous condition where aspergillus molds can settle in your lungs, creating aspergillosis, which can be very, very challenging to overcome. Let's see here. Can I take vitamin C if I have problems with too much oxalate? Yes, but you know, depending on why you have too much problems with oxalate. So there's some people that believe that too much vitamin C can actually exacerbate oxalate. That is a very, very rare thing indeed. It doesn't happen very often at all. This is very, very rare. So I just don't want to discourage people from using vitamin C if they suspect oxalate. Sugar, does it cause the same reactions as gluten or wheat? It can, depending on the person. I mean, I get people all the time that are allergic to sugar. I mean, we literally test them for sugar allergies, sugar sensitivity, and find that they are. As far as sugar substitutes, stevia is okay, provided it doesn't have any other fillers in it. What you have to be careful of are the alcohol sweeteners like erythritol, can be corn derived. There are some, like xylitol can be birchwood derived, and that's actually, in my opinion, one of the better options is birchwood xylitol. Okay, let's go down just a little bit on that right side. Well, I did. So Aaron wants to know if I'll do a video on schizophrenia. Sure. Yeah. I mean, bread madness. That's what it is, right? Schizophrenia is his original name was bread madness. It's definitely a disease linked to gluten sensitivity. And probably one of the smartest docs I've ever had the pleasure of reading is Abram Hoffer, and he goes into deep onto schizophrenia and vitamin B3 and vitamin C as therapeutic options for that condition. Is gluten-free buckwheat safe if it comes from a true gluten-free source? I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it for several reasons. One of the reasons is molecular mimicry. A lot of people react to it that are gluten sensitive, even if it comes from a great source. So wouldn't recommend it, especially if you're still struggling with any type of health issue. Okay, I think we've got lots more questions, but I ran out of time tonight, and I'm going to go home and eat dinner, and you guys should too. And I hope this was helpful. And if you're new to the gluten-free diet and you're new to the possibilities of what you can experience in your health with a change in your diet, and this is your first time hearing any of this information, like, don't leave this show tonight and walk away like overwhelmed and confused. Come visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. Make sure you sign up there for our free newsletter. I'll send you a bunch of free stuff and information that'll get you moving in the right direction. And I want to encourage all of you, if you haven't yet, sign up for the Glutenology Master Class. We go 14 hours deep into everything you could imagine possible about gluten. So I want to make sure you know that's a resource that costs you nothing that you can access. We're going to do that class in September 15th through the 19th. So make sure you go sign up. We've got to put that link up for you. And thanks to all of you for the wonderful birthday wishes. I appreciate it. I'm celebrating 49. That's why I wanted to give you 49 ways that gluten could cause damage or create a problem for you. So thanks for sharing tonight with me, and we'll see you next Monday night for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Take care. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.